The dust devils danced across the main street of Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, as if mocking the very existence of this forgotten corner of civilization. It was the summer of 1878, and the town sat like a weathered bone in the middle of nowhere, bleached by sun and scoured by wind. Mary Ellen Foster watched from behind the grimy window of Murphy's saloon, her raw hands submerged in lukewarm dishwater that had long since turned the color of weak tea. At 23, Mary had already lived through more winters than most women in these parts saw before taking a husband. But no man had come calling for her, not with flowers, not with promises, not even with the crude propositions that the other working girls sometimes received. The town had made its verdict clear. Mary Ellen Foster was too plain, too rough around the edges, too much like the harsh landscape itself to deserve a man's affection. She caught her reflection in the water's surface and quickly looked away. The distorted image only confirmed what everyone said: her jaw too strong, her shoulders too broad from years of hard labor, her hands too callous to ever be considered delicate. Even her hair, a muddy brown that refused to hold a curl, seemed to rebel against any attempt at femininity. "Mary, them glasses ain't gonna wash themselves," barked Tom Murphy from behind the bar, his voice cutting through her thoughts like a rusty blade. "Yes, Mr. Murphy," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd learned long ago that staying quiet meant staying invisible, and invisible was better than being the target of jokes. The saloon was already filling with the usual crowd cowboys fresh off the trail, their clothes dusty and their throats parched, local ranchers looking to forget their troubles in a bottle of rot-gut whiskey, and the occasional drifter with eyes that held too many secrets. Mary moved between the tables like a ghost, collecting empty glasses and mopping up spills, careful never to make eye contact or draw attention to herself. It was Jake Hollister who started it that night. Jake was the type who found his courage at the bottom of a whiskey glass and his humor in other people's misfortune. He'd been eyeing Mary all evening, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hey, boys," Jake called out, his voice loud enough to cut through the general din of the saloon. "I got me a proposition, a wager, if you will." The room's attention shifted to Jake, men turning from their cards and conversations to see what entertainment he was cooking up now. "I'll bet $50 no. Make it 100 that our Mary here dies an old maid. Ain't no man desperate enough to take her to the altar, no matter how slim the pickings get out here." The laughter that erupted was like thunder, rolling through the room and shaking Mary to her core. She stood frozen, a dirty glass in each hand, as the men slapped their knees and pounded the tables. "Hell, Jake, that ain't even a fair bet," someone shouted. "That's like betting the sun'll rise tomorrow." Even desperate Dan wouldn't court her, and he'd propose to a fence post if it wore a dress. Another voice chimed in. Mary's hands trembled, and one of the glasses slipped from her grip, shattering on the floor. The crash silenced the room for a moment, all eyes turning to her. She dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the pieces with her bare hands. "Careful there, Mary," Jake continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "Wouldn't want you to cut yourself, though I reckon it wouldn't make much difference to your marriage prospects either way." More laughter. Mary's vision blurred as tears threatened to spill. She blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here, not in front of them. Tom Murphy sighed from behind the bar. "All right, Jake, you've had your fun. Mary, leave them pieces. Go on home for the night." She didn't need to be told twice. Mary practically fled from the saloon, not bothering to collect her day's wages. The cool night air hit her flushed face like a blessing, but it couldn't wash away the humiliation that clung to her like trail dust. The walk to her small cabin on the edge of town had never seemed longer. The Foster homestead, if it could even be called that, consisted of a single-room log cabin that her parents had built with their own hands 20 years ago, back when they'd believed the territory held promise. They'd been gone 5 years now, taken by the fever that had swept through one particularly harsh winter. leaving Mary with nothing but the cabin, a patch of vegetable garden, and a loneliness so deep it felt like a physical weight. She pushed open the creaky door and lit the kerosene lamp with shaking hands. The soft glow illuminated the sparse interior, a narrow bed with a quilt her mother had made, a small table with 2 chairs, though only one had been used in years, and a wood stove that served for both cooking and warmth. Everything was clean and tidy, because what else did she have to do with her evenings but clean and wait for a life that seemed determined to pass her by? Mary sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears to come. They rolled down her cheeks in silent streams as Jake's words echoed in her mind. An old maid. Was that truly her fate, to grow old alone in this cabin? Washing dishes and scrubbing floors until her back gave out and her hands could no longer work. She thought of the other women in town. Sarah Jenkins with her pretty blonde curls and tinkling laugh, married at 17. Rebecca Stone with her tiny waist and China doll features, engaged to the banker's son. Even Bessie Crawford, who everyone agreed was unfortunate looking, had found herself a husband last spring, a widower with 3 children who needed a mother more than a beauty. But Mary was the cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. Don't let yourself go like the foster girl. No man wants a woman who looks like she could shoe her own horses. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, its lonely cry carrying across the plains. Mary understood that sound, felt it in her bones. She was 23 years old and had never been kissed. Never had a man look at her with anything but dismissal or pity. The most physical contact she'd experienced with the opposite sex was accidental brushes of fingers when handing back change or the occasional shoulder bump in the crowded saloon. She rose from the bed and moved to the small mirror hanging on the wall, a luxury her mother had insisted on years ago. In the lamplight, she studied her reflection honestly. Her face wasn't delicate or refined. Sun and wind had weathered her skin despite her efforts with bonnets and her mother's rose water. Her nose was straight but unremarkable, her lips neither full nor thin. Her eyes a gray-green like sagebrush might have been her best feature if anyone had ever bothered to look closely enough to notice. Mary touched her reflection with work-roughened fingers. "Too ugly," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. "Too ugly to love." The next morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of survival. Mary couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. There was wash to take in, Murphy's saloon to clean before the evening crowd, and Mrs. Henderson's house to tidy for the few coins it would bring. She dressed in her everyday calico faded blue with tiny flowers that had once been pink and twisted her unruly hair into its usual severe bun. As she made her way back into town, Mary kept her head down and her pace brisk. She could feel the eyes on her, hear the whispered comments and barely suppressed snickers. News of Jake's wager had spread overnight like wildfire through drought-dry grass. By now, everyone in Willow Creek knew about the bet, and worse, they were probably placing their own money on it. The morning sun climbed higher, baking the dusty streets and promising another scorching day. Mary had just reached Murphy's to begin her cleaning when she noticed the stranger. He sat alone at a corner table, hat pulled low over his eyes, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him at first glance. Medium height, medium build, clothes that had seen better days but were clean and mended with care. But something about the way he held himself, a quiet alertness like a wolf scanning for danger, made Mary pause in the doorway. Tom Murphy noticed her hesitation. "Don't worry about him," he said, wiping down the bar. "Came in this morning looking for work. Name's Ethan Cole. Seems decent enough, though quiet as a grave." Mary nodded and went about her business, gathering the chairs from the tables and setting them upside down so she could mop the floor. She was acutely aware of the stranger's presence, but refused to look in his direction. The last thing she needed was to give anyone more ammunition for their jokes. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain near the bar, when she heard the chair scrape. Boots appeared in her peripheral vision, worn leather, well-maintained despite their age. "Ma'am," a low voice said, "let me help you with that." Mary looked up, startled. The stranger, Ethan Cole, had removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature silver and eyes the color of bitter coffee. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense, but there was something about his weathered face that suggested strength and endurance. That's not necessary," Mary stammered, unused to offers of help. "Maybe not," he agreed, already taking the brush from her unresisting hand. "But my mama raised me to never let a lady struggle with a task if I could lend a hand." "Lady?" He'd called her a lady. Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly stood, smoothing her apron. "I'm paid to do this work, Mr. Cole." "And I'm hoping to be paid for some work myself," he replied, attacking the stain with practiced efficiency. "Might as well make myself useful while I wait for Murphy to make up his mind." Mary didn't know what to do with herself. She stood there awkwardly, watching this stranger do her job, torn between gratitude and embarrassment. "You don't need to," she began. "I know," he said simply, glancing up at her with those dark eyes. "But sometimes folks do things not because they need to, but because it's right." There was no pity in his gaze, no mockery. He looked at her the way he might look at anyone directly, honestly, without the film of judgment she'd grown so accustomed to seeing. "There," Ethan said, sitting back on his heels. The stain was gone. He handed the brush back to her, and their fingers brushed briefly. His hands were as calloused as hers. She noticed. Working hands, honest hands. "Thank you," Mary managed, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, stood, and returned to his table without another word. Mary went back to her cleaning, but something had shifted. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had seen her as a person worth helping. Not the ugly foster girl, not the old maid in waiting, but simply a woman with a difficult task. As the day wore on and the saloon began to fill with its regular evening crowd, Mary found herself stealing glances at Ethan Cole. He'd taken a job with Murphy, starting immediately hauling barrels, restocking shelves, dealing with the heavier work that Tom's aging back couldn't handle anymore. He went about his tasks with quiet efficiency, speaking only when spoken to, seemingly oblivious to the curious stares and whispered speculation about the newcomer. It was nearly midnight when Jake Hollister and his cronies stumbled in, already half drunk from somewhere else. Mary's stomach clenched when she saw them, but she forced herself to continue collecting empty glasses as if nothing was wrong. Well, Jake slurred, catching sight of her. "If it ain't the future old maid herself. Any takers on my bet yet? Boys." The group laughed raucously. Mary kept her eyes down, moving past them toward the bar. "Hold up there, Mary," Jake said, grabbing her arm. His grip was too tight, his breath sour with whiskey. "Why the hurry, not like you got a man waiting at home for you?" "Please let go," Mary said quietly, trying to pull away without dropping her tray of glasses. "Oh, she said please," Jake mocked. "Such a polite little—" "The lady asked you to let go." The voice cut through the noise like a knife. Ethan Cole stood behind Jake, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. Jake released Mary's arm and turned, swaying slightly. "And who the hell are you?" "Nobody special," Ethan replied evenly. "Just a man who believes when a lady asks you to let go, you let go." "Lady," Jake laughed, gesturing wildly at Mary. "This ain't no lady. This here's the homeliest—" He never finished the sentence. Ethan's hand shot out, gripping Jake's wrist in the same spot where he'd held Mary. The movement was so fast, so controlled, that Jake's eyes widened in shock. "I think you've had enough for tonight," Ethan said, his voice still calm, but carrying an undertone that made the hair on Mary's neck stand up. "Time to head home." For a moment, the saloon held its breath. Jake's friends looked between him and the stranger, calculating odds. But something in Ethan's stance, the coiled readiness of a man who'd faced down worse than drunk cowboys, made them think twice. Jake yanked his hand away, rubbing his wrist. "This ain't over," he muttered, but he was already backing toward the door. When they were gone, Ethan turned to Mary. "You all right, ma'am?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. The tray trembled in her hands. "Here," he said, gently taking it from her. "Why don't you call it a night? I'll finish up here." "But Mr. Murphy—" "I'll square it with Tom," Ethan assured her. "Go on home. Get some rest." Mary looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or ulterior motive. She found neither, only a quiet kindness that made her throat tight with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of respect she'd seen men give to other women, but never to her. "No thanks needed, Miss Foster. Just doing what's right." As Mary walked home through the cooling night air, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe Jake was wrong. Maybe she wasn't destined to die alone and unloved. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone in this world who could look at her and see something worth protecting. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But for the first time in a long time, Mary Ellen Foster didn't feel quite so alone beneath their distant light. The morning sun painted the weathered boards of Murphy's saloon in shades of gold and amber as Ethan Cole hefted another barrel of whiskey from the delivery wagon. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival in Willow Creek, and the rhythm of the small town had begun to seep into his bones like the dust that settled in every crevice and corner. He paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, his eyes automatically scanning the street. It was a habit born from years of drifting, of never knowing when trouble might come calling. But this morning, like most mornings lately, he found himself looking for something else, someone else. There she was. Mary Foster emerged from the general store, a basket of supplies balanced on her hip. The morning light caught the wisps of hair that had escaped her severe bun, turning them to copper. She moved with purpose, head down, shoulders squared against the world's judgment. Ethan had been watching her these past weeks, though he tried to be subtle about it. He'd learned her routines: dishwashing at Murphy's in the evenings, laundry service 3 days a week, cleaning houses for the more prosperous families in town. She worked harder than most men he'd known, yet carried herself with a quiet dignity that intrigued him. "You gonna stare at her all day, or you gonna finish unloading this wagon?" Tom Murphy's gravelly voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan turned to find the older man grinning at him, knowingly. "Just taking a breather, Tom." "Sure you were." Murphy leaned against the doorframe, following Ethan's gaze to where Mary was disappearing around a corner. "You know, in all my years running this place, I've never seen anyone defend Mary Foster the way you did that first night." "Man shouldn't grab a woman like that," Ethan said simply, returning to his work. "No, he shouldn't," Murphy agreed. "But most folks around here wouldn't have stepped in, not for Mary." "Why?" The question came out sharper than Ethan intended. "What's she done to deserve their contempt?" Murphy sighed, pulling out his pipe. "Nothing, far as I can tell. Her crime is being plain in a world that values pretty, being strong in a place that wants women delicate. Her parents were good people, hardworking, honest. But they were outsiders too. Came from back east with dreams bigger than their understanding of what this land demands. Mary's paid for their optimism." Ethan absorbed this information as he carried another barrel inside. He'd known his share of outsiders, had been one himself more times than he could count. The daughter of dreamers, orphaned and alone, working herself to the bone just to survive. It stirred something in him, a recognition that went deeper than sympathy. "She's not as plain as folks make out," he said quietly. Murphy's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Man would have to be blind not to see it. The way she moves, like she's dancing with work itself, the way her eyes change color in different light, gray as a storm coming in, green as sage after rain." Ethan caught himself and coughed, embarrassed by his own poetry. "Just saying folks see what they expect to see." "And what do you see? Ethan Cole." Ethan considered the question as he positioned the last barrel. What did he see? A woman who faced each day with stubborn courage, hands that stayed gentle despite their calluses, a loneliness that echoed his own. "I see someone worth knowing," he said finally. Murphy nodded slowly. "Well then, you best get to knowing her. But be careful, son. Mary's built walls around herself for good reason. And this town—" He gestured vaguely at the street. "This town can be cruel to those who dare to be different." As if to underscore Murphy's warning, Jake Hollister chose that moment to swagger past the saloon. He'd been nursing his wounded pride since Ethan's intervention, spreading rumors and casting dark looks. Ethan met his glare steadily until Jake spat in the dust and moved on. "That one's trouble," Murphy observed. "I've handled worse," Ethan replied. "I don't doubt it. There's steel in you. Anyone can see that. Question is, what's a man with your skills doing in a nowhere town like Willow Creek?" It was a fair question, one Ethan had been asking himself. He'd drifted into town like tumbleweed, rolled in by chance and circumstance. The plan had been to rest a few days, earn some traveling money, move on to, California, Oregon. Some other place where the past couldn't follow. But 3 weeks had passed, and he was still here. Still unloading freight and sweeping floors. Still sleeping in the small room above the saloon that Murphy rented cheap. Still finding excuses to be where Mary Foster might appear. "Sometimes a man gets tired of drifting," he said finally. "Sometimes a place feels like it might be worth staying." Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, if you're thinking of staying, you might want to know that Mary does her washing down by the creek on Wednesdays, about 2 miles north of town, where the cottonwoods grow thick, just in case you find yourself in need of clean clothes midweek." Ethan couldn't hide his smile. "That's good information. Tom, much obliged." Wednesday came with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Ethan had genuinely dirty clothes. A man couldn't work in a saloon without accumulating stains bundled in a canvas sack. He'd saddled his horse, a steady bay gelding named Sage, and headed north with what he hoped was casual purpose. The creek appeared like a ribbon of silver through the cottonwoods, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. He heard her before he saw her, the rhythmic splash of water, the slap of wet fabric on stone. Then he rounded a bend, and there she was. Mary knelt by the water's edge, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned by sun and strengthened by labor. Her hair had come partially undone, hanging in damp tendrils around her face. She was humming something, a hymn, maybe, or an old folk song, completely absorbed in her work. Ethan dismounted quietly, not wanting to startle her, but Sage nickered a greeting, and Mary's head snapped up. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the dancing water. "Mr. Cole," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Are you lost?" "No, ma'am. Tom mentioned this was a good spot for washing. I've got some things need cleaning." He held up his bundle as evidence. Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious. "There's a Chinese laundry in town. They do good work." "I'm sure they do, but I've been doing my own washing since I was 12. Seems foolish to pay for something I can do myself." He paused, then added, "If you don't mind sharing the creek, that is, I can find another spot." Mary studied him for a long moment. Ethan stood still, letting her take his measure. He knew what she was looking for: mockery, ulterior motives, the setup for another cruel joke. He kept his expression open, honest, hoping she'd see the truth of his intentions. "Creek doesn't belong to me," she said finally, turning back to her work. "Plenty of room." Ethan tied Sage to a cottonwood and made his way to a flat rock upstream from Mary, close enough for conversation if she wanted it, far enough to respect her space. He pulled out his shirts and began working, the familiar ritual of soap and water and stone settling his nerves. They worked in silence for a while, the creek babbling between them. Ethan found himself stealing glances at Mary, noting the efficient grace of her movements. the way she attacked stains with single-minded determination. There was something meditative about sharing this simple task, something that stripped away the complications of town and society and left just two people by the water. "You're good at that," Mary said suddenly, surprising them both. Ethan looked down at the shirt he was wringing out. "Lot of practice. Been on my own a long time." "How long?" "Since I was 15. My folks had a ranch up in Montana Territory. Blackfoot raid took them both. I buried them, sold what I could, and started moving." The words came out matter-of-fact, but Mary's hands stilled in the water. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." He resumed scrubbing, then added, "I heard you lost your parents, too." "Fever. 5 winters back." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the creek's murmur. "At least I got to say goodbye." They fell silent again. But it was a different silence now, one that held understanding rather than uncertainty. Two orphans washing clothes by a creek, bound by loss and labor. "Can I ask you something?" Mary said after a while. "Ask away." "Why did you step in that night with Jake?" Ethan considered his answer carefully. Man sees something wrong. He's got 2 choices. Look away or step up. I've looked away before. Didn't care for how it felt. "But you don't know me. I'm nothing to you." The words held such matter-of-fact acceptance of her perceived worthlessness that Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He set down his washing and turned to face her fully. "You're wrong about that, Miss Foster. You're not nothing. You're the woman who works harder than anyone in that town. You're the one who hums hymns when she thinks no one's listening. You're the person who thanks me every evening for work I'm paid to do, like my effort matters to you." Mary's cheeks flushed pink. "You notice all that?" "I notice a lot of things, like how you always save the heel of bread for the Murphy's old dog, even though it means you go without. How you know everyone's name, even the drifters and the drunks. How you walk through that town with your head high despite their whispers." He picked up his washing again, suddenly self-conscious. "So no, Miss Foster, you're not nothing, not to me." The silence that followed felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Mary's hands had stopped moving entirely, her washing forgotten in her lap. When Ethan risked a glance at her, he found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're a strange man, Ethan Cole," she said finally. "Been told that before." "No, I mean," she seemed to struggle for words. "Nobody's ever seen me before. Really seen me. It's unsettling. Good unsettling or bad unsettling." A small smile tugged at her lips, transforming her face in a way that made Ethan's breath catch. "I haven't decided yet." They returned to their washing, but the atmosphere had shifted. Mary began to talk tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She told him about her parents, dreamers who'd believed the newspaper advertisements about rich farmland and easy prosperity, about learning to make do with less, then almost nothing, about the first time she'd realized the town saw her as an oddity, a cautionary tale, a joke. Ethan listened, adding his own stories when it felt right. Tales from the trail, hard lessons learned in harder places, near misses with the rustlers and Indians, nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, the loneliness of always moving, never belonging. "Why did you really stop here?" Mary asked as the sun climbed toward noon. "A man with your skills could find work anywhere." Ethan wrung out his last shirt, considering. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in exhaustion and longing and something else, something that had taken shape the moment he'd seen her kneeling on that saloon floor, struggling with work and wounded dignity. "Maybe I was tired of anywhere," he said finally. "Maybe I was looking for somewhere." Mary stood, gathering her washing into a basket. The movement was practical, efficient, but Ethan caught the slight tremor in her hands. "And is Willow Creek somewhere?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. "Starting to think it might be." She did look at him then, searching his face with those storm cloud eyes. Whatever she found there made her nod slowly. "I should get back," she said. "Mrs. Henderson expects her linens by 2. Let me help you carry that." Ethan reached for the basket, but Mary stepped back. "No," she said quickly, then softer. "Thank you, but no. If people saw—" She trailed off, but Ethan understood. Her reputation was fragile enough without adding fuel to the gossip fire. "Next Wednesday," he asked instead. "Same time." Mary hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and something else, loneliness, maybe, or the simple human need for companionship. "I'll be here," she said finally. "The washing won't do itself." "No," Ethan agreed. "It won't." He watched her walk away, basket balanced on her hip, back straight despite the load. When she disappeared through the cottonwoods, he sat down on his rock and let out a long breath. Tom Murphy had been right. Mary Foster had built walls around herself, tall and strong and necessary, but walls could be climbed, with patience and care. And Ethan Cole, drifter and wanderer, suddenly found himself with all the patience in the world. Back in town, Mary delivered Mrs. Henderson's linens and endured the older woman's sharp critique of her starching technique. She nodded and apologized and promised to do better, all while her mind remained by the creek with a quiet cowboy who saw things nobody else bothered to notice. That evening at Murphy's, she caught herself looking for him, listening for his steady footsteps on the floor above. When he came down to help with the dinner rush, their eyes met across the crowded room. He touched the brim of his hat, that gesture of respect that still made her stomach flutter, and she couldn't stop the small smile that curved her lips in response. Jake Hollister, nursing his third whiskey at the bar, noticed the exchange. His eyes narrowed, and he muttered something to his companions that made them laugh unpleasantly. Mary forced herself to look away, to focus on her work, but she could feel Jake's stare following her like a physical weight. "Careful, Mary," Bessie Crawford whispered as they passed in the kitchen. Bessie worked the tables most nights, serving drinks with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Jake's been in a mood since that cowboy showed up, and you know how he gets when he's crossed." "I haven't done anything wrong," Mary said quietly. "Since when has that mattered to men like Jake?" Bessie touched her arm gently. "Just be careful." "That Ethan Cole seems decent enough, but decent men don't always stick around, and when they leave—" She didn't finish, but Mary understood. When they leave, it's the women who pay the price. But as Mary went about her evening work, she found herself thinking not of Jake's threats or Bessie's warnings, but of a man who did his own washing and noticed when she fed stray dogs. A man who spoke of loneliness like someone who understood its weight. A man who looked at her and saw someone worth defending, worth knowing, worth seeing. For the first time in years, Mary Foster allowed herself to hope. It was a dangerous thing. Hope. It made you vulnerable, made you dream of impossible things. But as she caught another glimpse of Ethan across the room, steady, solid, real, she couldn't quite bring herself to push it away. The night stretched on, full of the usual noise and chaos, but Mary moved through it with a secret warming her chest like a small, stubborn flame. Wednesday would come again. The creek would be there, and the cottonwoods, and the chance to be seen by someone who looked at her and found her worthy of notice. It wasn't much, perhaps, but for a woman who'd lived so long in the shadows of others' contempt, it felt like everything. The weeks folded into each other like pages in a well-worn book, each Wednesday by the creek becoming a chapter Mary Foster treasured in secret. 6 weeks had passed since that first shared washing day, and the rhythm they'd established felt as natural as breathing, as necessary as water. This particular Wednesday dawned gray and brooding, with clouds piling up like dirty wool against the horizon. Mary hesitated at her cabin door, wondering if rain would drive Ethan away from their meeting place. But stubbornness won out. Her washing couldn't wait for fair weather. and perhaps he wouldn't come anyway. Perhaps he was tiring of their careful friendship, these stolen hours of conversation between soap and stone. But when she reached the cottonwoods, he was there, sitting on his usual rock, a fishing pole in hand and his washing already spread on the bushes to dry. He looked up at her approach, and that slow smile of his spread across his weathered face like sunrise. "Thought I'd try for some trout while I waited," he said by way of greeting. "Creek's running high from the mountain snowmelt." "You've been here a while?" Mary observed, noting his already finished laundry. "Couldn't sleep." He set the pole aside, giving her his full attention. "Storm coming in got me restless. Always does, ever since—" He stopped, shook his head. "Well, storms and me have history." Mary set down her basket and began sorting clothes. She'd learned to read Ethan's silences over these weeks, to understand the difference between peaceful quiet and the kind that held old pain. This was the latter. "Want to tell me about it?" she asked softly. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Last storm I weathered on the trail, I lost my partner, Charlie Briggs. We'd been riding together 3 years, working cattle drives from Texas up to Montana. Storm hit us just south of the Platte River. Lightning spooked the herd, started a stampede." Mary's hands stilled in the water. She'd heard enough trail stories to know what stampedes meant: tons of panicked beef charging blind through the darkness, destroying everything in their path. Charlie tried to turn the leaders, get them running in a circle. His horse stumbled. Ethan's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his knees. "By the time we found him, wasn't much left to bury. I finished the drive, collected his pay along with mine, sent it to his widow in Austin. Then I started drifting. Been 2 years now." "I'm sorry," Mary said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. Charlie used to say the only thing worse than dying alone was living alone. Ethan picked up a stone, skipped it across the water. Starting to think he was right, the admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Mary felt her heart hammering against her ribs. These past weeks had been a slow dance of careful revelation, each of them sharing pieces of themselves like traded treasures. But this felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Mary felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her rolled-up sleeves or the wisps of hair escaping her bun. His eyes held a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Thunder rumbled in the distance, saving her from having to try. They both looked up at the darkening sky. "We should hurry," Mary said, grateful for the distraction. "That storm's moving fast." They worked in companionable silence, racing against the weather. But the storm was faster. The first fat drops of rain splattered down just as Mary was wringing out her last petticoat. Within moments, the drops became a deluge. "My cabin," Ethan shouted over the rain, pointing to a barely visible structure through the trees. "It's closer than town." Mary hesitated. Going to a man's cabin, alone, was the sort of thing that ruined whatever reputation she had left. But the rain was already soaking through her dress, and the temperature was dropping fast. Propriety seemed less important than pneumonia. She nodded, grabbing her basket. Ethan took it from her without asking, his hand catching hers briefly to pull her along. They ran through the cottonwoods, rain lashing at them like liquid whips, thunder cracking overhead with increasing violence. The cabin materialized through the gray curtain of rain, a small, sturdy structure that Ethan had been fixing up these past weeks. He'd mentioned it in passing, an abandoned trapper's shelter he'd gotten permission to use in exchange for repairs. Mary had never imagined she'd see it under these circumstances. Ethan shouldered the door open, ushering her inside before following with their sodden belongings. The sudden absence of rain was almost shocking, leaving them both breathing hard in the dim space. "I'll get a fire going," Ethan said, already moving to the small stove in the corner. "There's a towel on that hook and a blanket in the chest. You're soaked through." Mary stood dripping just inside the door, suddenly acutely aware of their situation. The cabin was sparse, but clean, a single room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a few shelves holding supplies. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something indefinably Ethan. "Mary." His voice was gentle. "You're shivering. Please, get warm. I'll turn my back if you need to. That is, your dress." She looked down at herself. Her calico clung to her like a second skin, revealing every curve she usually kept hidden under layers of propriety. Her face flamed, but her teeth were chattering too hard to protest. "Thank you," she managed, reaching for the towel. True to his word, Ethan kept his back turned, focusing on coaxing life from the kindling in the stove. Mary peeled off her sopping dress with numb fingers, wrapping herself first in the towel, then the blanket. It was wool, soft with age, and it smelled like him, leather and soap and something wild. "I'm decent," she said when the blanket was secure around her shoulders. Ethan turned, and something flashed in his eyes, a heat that had nothing to do with the fire he'd just lit. But he controlled it quickly, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Sit close to the heat. I'll make some coffee." Mary sank into the chair gratefully, pulling the blanket tighter. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Rain hammering the roof like bullets, wind howling through the trees. But inside the little cabin, warmth began to spread from the stove, creating a pocket of safety in the chaos. "This is nice," Mary said, surprised to realize she meant it. "Your cabin, it's comfortable." Ethan smiled as he filled a battered coffee pot with water. "It's not much, but it's starting to feel like home. First real home I've had since Montana." He paused, then added quietly, "Been thinking about maybe staying permanent, if I had reason to." There it was again, that weight of meaning, that question hanging in the air between them. Mary pulled the blanket tighter, using it as armor against the feelings threatening to overwhelm her. "Ethan," she started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "How did you tell someone you were terrified of the very thing you wanted most?" He seemed to understand, moving slowly, telegraphing his intentions. He knelt beside her chair, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his warmth competing with the stove's. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "I know this town has taught you to expect cruelty from men. But Mary, I need you to hear something." She looked down at him, at this man who'd entered her life like a quiet storm of his own, changing everything without seeming to try. "I've ridden a lot of trails," he continued, "seen a lot of faces, known a lot of people, but I've never met anyone like you. The way you face each day with courage, even when the world gives you no reason to. The way you find beauty in small things. I've seen you stop to admire wildflowers when you think no one's looking. The way you hum when you work, like you're keeping yourself company." "Those aren't special things," Mary whispered. "Those are just surviving." "No," his voice was firm. "That's living. That's choosing light when darkness would be easier. That's strength most people never need to find." He shifted slightly, still not touching her, but somehow closer. "I've been watching you for weeks now, and every day I see something new, something that makes me want to know more." "I'm not—" Mary struggled for words, fought against years of conditioning. "I'm not what men want. I'm too plain, too rough, too perfect for a broken-down cowboy who spent years running from his own shadow." Ethan's smile was self-deprecating. "Mary, I've got scars you can't see. Nights I wake up still hearing Charlie scream. Days when the loneliness sits on my chest like a stone. I'm no prize catch myself." "You're kind," Mary protested. "You're good." "So are you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the back of her hand where it clutched the blanket. "So are you." The touch was electric, sending sparks up Mary's arm and straight to her heart. She turned her hand palm up without conscious thought, and he laced their fingers together. His hands were calloused and warm, strong but gentle, and Mary felt something inside her chest crack open like ice in spring. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, tears pricking her eyes. No one has ever—" "We'll go slow," Ethan promised. "Slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere. Mary, not unless you tell me to." Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. The storm was right on top of them now, turning the afternoon dark as evening. But inside the cabin, with the stove crackling and their hands linked, Mary felt safer than she had in years. "Tell me about Montana," she said, needing to lighten the moment before she did something foolish like cry. "Tell me about your ranch." So he did, still kneeling beside her chair, still holding her hand. Ethan painted pictures with words, rolling grasslands that went on forever, mountains that scraped the sky, winters so cold your breath froze before it left your lips. He told her about breaking horses and branding cattle, about his mother's garden and his father's laugh, about the life that had been stolen but never forgotten. "I used to think I'd go back someday," he said as the coffee finished brewing. "Buy some land near where the old place was. Start again, but lately—" He squeezed her hand gently. "Lately, I've been thinking maybe home isn't about going back. Maybe it's about finding where you belong now." Mary understood. She'd spent years clinging to her parents' cabin not out of love for the structure, but because it was all she had left of belonging somewhere. But sitting here, storm-wrapped and safe, she wondered if belonging had more to do with people than places. Ethan rose to pour the coffee, and Mary immediately missed the warmth of his hand. He handed her a cup tin, dented perfect, and pulled the other chair close to hers. "Storm's not letting up," he observed. "Could be stuck here a while." "I should worry about my reputation," Mary said, surprising herself with dry humor. "But I suppose there's not much left to ruin." "Don't say that," Ethan's voice was sharp. "You're worth more than their narrow minds can see. Worth more than—" He stopped, took a breath. "When I look at you, know what I see." Mary shook her head, both dreading and desperate for his answer. "I see a woman who makes beauty out of nothing, who turns wash water into baptism, who finds grace in grudge work. I see hands that stay gentle even when life is hard, eyes that hold storms and promises, strength that puts most men to shame." He set down his coffee, leaned forward. "I see the woman I've been looking for without knowing I was looking." "Ethan, I see my reason to stop running." The words hung between them like a bridge over deep water. Mary felt tears spill over, hot against her rain-cooled cheeks. No one had ever looked at her and seen anything worth keeping. No one had ever suggested she might be someone's destination rather than their last resort. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I am too." He reached out, thumbed away her tears with infinite tenderness. "But maybe we can be scared together. Maybe that's better than being scared alone." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder immediate and deafening. The wind howled like a living thing, and something crashed against the cabin wall. Mary jumped, and without thinking, reached for Ethan. He caught her, pulled her against his chest, the blanket and all. She could feel his heart hammering as hard as hers, could smell rain and wood smoke in his shirt. His arms came around her, not imprisoning but sheltering, and Mary let herself lean into his strength. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "Storm can't get us here. We're safe." Safe. When had she last felt truly safe? Not just from storms, but from the world's cruelty, from the weight of being unwanted. But here, held careful as spun glass in a cowboy's arms. Mary felt the walls she'd built beginning to crumble. They stayed like that while the storm raged, neither speaking, both afraid to break whatever spell had been woven. Mary listened to Ethan's heartbeat, steady and sure beneath her ear. Felt his breath stir her hair. Felt his hands smooth careful patterns on her back through the blanket. When the storm finally began to ease, The light was fading toward true evening. Mary knew she should pull away, should worry about getting back to town, should care what people would say when they learned where she'd spent the afternoon. But she couldn't seem to make herself move. "Mary," Ethan said softly, "sun's going down. I should get you home." "I know." But she didn't move. "Or—" He paused, and she could feel him gathering courage. "Or you could stay. I'll sleep by the stove. You take the bed. Nothing improper. Just stay." Mary pulled back enough to look at his face. What she saw there, hope and fear and desperate wanting, mirror her own feelings, so exactly it took her breath away. "If I stay," she said carefully, "everything changes. People will talk. Jake will—" "Let them talk." His jaw set stubbornly. "Let Jake do his worst. I'm not afraid of him or anyone else in that town. Only thing I'm afraid of is you walking out that door and deciding this was a mistake." "This?" Mary asked, though she knew what he meant. "Us," he said simply. "Whatever this is between us, because Mary, I've got to tell you I've never felt anything like it, like I've been half asleep my whole life and you woke me up." The poetry of it, from this plain-spoken man, nearly undid her completely, but still she hesitated, a lifetime of caution warring with newly awakened hope. "I'm not an easy woman," she warned. "I don't know how to be soft or delicate or any of the things men want." "Good," Ethan interrupted. "Because I don't want easy or soft or delicate. I want real. I want strong. I want you, Mary Foster, exactly as you are." And finally, Mary let herself believe, not in fairy tales or happily ever afters, but in the possibility that two damaged people might build something whole together, that a drifting cowboy and a too-plain woman might find in each other the home they'd both been seeking. "All right," she whispered, "I'll stay." Ethan's smile was like dawn breaking. He pressed his lips to her forehead, a promise, a benediction, a beginning. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving the world washed clean and new. And inside a small cabin by a creek, two hearts began the careful work of learning to beat as one. The lamp burned low on the small table, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Mary sat wrapped in Ethan's blanket, her hair finally dry and falling loose around her shoulders in waves she usually kept severely pinned. She'd never let anyone see her like this, unbound, unguarded, uninhibited by the armor of propriety she wore like chainmail. Ethan moved about the small space with quiet efficiency, preparing a simple supper from his stores. Salt pork, beans, cornbread fried in the skillet. Bachelor fare. He'd apologized, but to Mary it smelled like heaven. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her, taken care of her, worried whether she was warm enough or hungry. "You should eat something," he said, setting a plate before her. "Storm took a lot out of you." "The storm?" Mary asked with a small smile. "Just the storm." He ducked his head, almost shy. "Maybe not just the storm." They ate in comfortable silence, the evening settling around them like a quilt. Through the single window, Mary could see stars beginning to emerge, washed brilliant by the storm's passing. The world felt new-made, fragile as spun glass and twice as beautiful. "I should tell you something," Ethan said eventually, pushing his empty plate aside, "about why I really stayed in Willow Creek." Mary tensed slightly. Revelations rarely brought good news in her experience. "That first night, when Jake grabbed you—" Ethan's jaw tightened at the memory. "I saw something in your eyes, not just hurt or fear, though those were there. I saw resignation, like you'd accepted that was all you deserved from life, rough handling and cruel words." "It's what I'm used to," Mary said quietly. "I know, that's what stopped me cold." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "Because I recognized it. That look, I wore it for years after my parents died, after Charlie. That bone-deep belief that you're meant to walk alone, that wanting more is just asking for heartbreak." Mary set down her fork, giving him her full attention. He rarely spoke of his losses, hoarding his pain like a miser with gold. I drifted for 2 years. Mary, 2 years of different towns, different faces, never staying long enough for anyone to matter. You know what that does to a man, strips him down to nothing but motion. No past worth claiming, no future worth building. Just the next town, the next job, the next empty room. But you stopped here, Mary prompted gently. I stopped here. His smile was rueful. Told myself it was just for a few days. Tom Murphy seemed decent. Work was steady. Room was clean. All the same lies I'd told myself in a dozen other towns. But then, he looked up at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. Then I saw you. Not just that first night, but after, the way you worked without complaint, the dignity you maintained despite their mockery. And I thought, here's someone else walking through life alone, convinced they deserve nothing better. Here's someone who might understand. Is that why you sought me out? Mary asked, not sure if she was disappointed or relieved. Because you recognized a fellow lost soul. At first, maybe. Ethan stood, moved to the window, his silhouette backlit by stars. But Mary, that changed so fast it made my head spin. Every conversation, every Wednesday by the creek, I found new reasons to stay. Your humor, yes, you have one, dry as prairie dust, but there. Your intelligence, the way you see beauty where others see only harshness. He turned back to her, and the lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines that hard living had etched around his eyes. I stayed because somewhere between that first night and now, I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Mary felt them settle into her chest, warming space that had been cold so long she'd forgotten they could hold heat. You barely know me, she whispered, the protest automatic even as her heart raced. Don't I? Ethan moved back to his chair, pulled it close enough that their knees almost touched. I know you wake before dawn every day, not because you have to, but because you can't stand to waste daylight. I know you test the wash water with your elbow like your mother taught you, and you still miss her every time you do it. I know you count your steps when you're nervous, 17 from Murphy's door to the bar, 23 from your cabin to the well. Mary's eyes widened. She hadn't realized anyone noticed her small habits, her private rituals. I know you're afraid of thunder, but fascinated by lightning. I know you give names to the horses at the livery stable and sneak them apple cores when you think no one's watching. I know you dream. Mary, I've seen you staring at the horizon like you're trying to see past it to something better. Stop, Mary breathed, overwhelmed. Please. But Ethan leaned forward, caught her hands in his. I know the sound of your laugh rare as rain in August, but worth the wait. I know you're stronger than you believe and kinder than this town deserves. I know you've been alone so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be chosen. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Mary tried to pull her hands away, to hide her face, but Ethan held on gently. Let me choose you, Mary. Let me show you what it feels like to be someone's first choice, not their last resort. I don't know how, she admitted through her tears. I've been alone so long, I don't know how to be anything else. Then we'll learn together. He lifted her hands, pressed his lips to each palm in turn. I'm not asking for everything all at once. Just the chance to prove that you're worth loving, that we're worth fighting for. Mary looked at this man who'd wandered into her life like tumbleweed and taken root in her heart. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the town's judgment, Jake's threats, her own fear of disappointment. Then she thought of the alternative more years of loneliness, of washing other people's clothes and cleaning other people's messes, of walking through life like a ghost in her own existence. All right, she said, the words coming easier than expected. All right, Ethan Cole, choose me. His smile was radiant, transforming his weathered features into something almost boyish. You won't regret it, he promised. I might, Mary said with complete honesty. But I think I'd regret saying no even more. Ethan stood, pulling her up with him. For a moment, they just stood there, hands clasped, bodies close but not quite touching. The air between them crackled with possibility. "Mary," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I want to kiss you. I've wanted to since that day by the creek when you smiled at me like I'd hung the moon. But I need you to want it too. I need to know it's not just gratitude or loneliness or—" Mary silenced him the only way she could think of. She rose up on her toes, one hand bracing against his chest, and pressed her lips to his. It was awkward at first. She had no experience, no knowledge of how this dance was supposed to go. But Ethan made a sound low in his throat, and his arms came around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other spreading warm across her back. He angled his head, deepened the kiss with gentle expertise, teaching without demanding. Mary felt something unknot in her chest. This was what she'd been missing, this connection that went beyond words. Not just the physical pleasure of it, though, that was a revelation, but the intimacy of being held like something precious, kissed like something desired. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he said, voice not quite steady, "that was my first kiss," Mary confessed, then immediately wished she hadn't. What man wanted a woman so inexperienced, so utterly unpracticed in the arts of romance? But Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Mine too," he said, and when she pulled back to look at him skeptically, he clarified. "First one that mattered, first one that felt like coming home." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other like shipwrecked survivors clinging to shore. Outside, night had fully fallen, and with it the temperature, the cabin's warmth wrapped around them, creating a world separate from the judgment and cruelty that waited in town. "I should make up the bed for you," Ethan said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "You need rest." "Where will you sleep?" "By the stove. I've got bedrolls. Slept in worse places." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "I meant what I said. Mary, nothing improper. I'll court you proper. The way you deserve. The way your father would have wanted." The mention of her father brought fresh tears. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "Mama, too. They always said I'd know the right man by how he treated me when no one was watching." "And how do I treat you?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Like I matter," Mary said simply, "like I'm worth seeing." They prepared for sleep with careful attention to propriety, Ethan stepping outside while Mary changed into her now dry dress, Mary turning her back while he arranged his bedroll by the stove. But when she was settled in his narrow bed, wrapped in blankets that smelled of leather and sage, she found herself wide awake. "Ethan," she called softly into the darkness. "Yeah." "Tell me about the future. What happens tomorrow when we go back to town?" She heard him shift, probably turning to face her direction, though they couldn't see each other in the dark. "Tomorrow, I walk you to your door like a gentleman. Then I come calling official-like. Maybe bring flowers if I can find any that survived the storm. I sit on your porch if you'll let me. Talk about everything and nothing. I court you in full view of the town. Let them see that Ethan Cole thinks Mary Foster is worth pursuing." "They'll talk," Mary warned. "Let them. Their words can't hurt us if we don't give them power." He paused. "I'm not naive. Mary, I know it'll be hard. Jake won't take kindly to being made a fool. And this town loves its gossip. But I've faced down worse than small-minded people and lived to tell about it." "And then," Mary prompted, needing to hear him paint a future she'd never dared imagine for herself. "Then we take it day by day. I work, you work. We meet by the creek when we can. I teach you to ride better, don't deny it. I've seen you on a horse. You teach me whatever you want. We build something together, slow and steady and real. And eventually," she heard the smile in his voice, "eventually, when you're ready, when you trust me enough, I marry you, make an honest woman of you." as they say, though you're already the most honest person I know. We fix up this cabin or build something new, maybe run some cattle, grow a garden, have a life, marry, a real life, together. The picture he painted was so simple, so achingly normal. Yet to Mary, it seemed as fantastical as a fairy tale. You really think it could happen, all that? I know it can, if we're brave enough to try. Mary lay in the darkness, processing everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been the same woman she'd been for 5 years alone, resigned, going through motions that barely qualified as living. Tonight she was someone chosen, someone loved, someone with a future that held more than endless toil and loneliness. Ethan, she called again. Still here. Thank you for seeing me, for staying, for, She struggled for words big enough. For everything. Thank me by being happy, he said softly. That's all I want, Mary, to see you happy. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of gardens and cattle, and a life where love was as common as morning coffee. Mary woke once in the night, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. But then she heard Ethan's steady breathing from across the room and remembered she wasn't alone anymore. When dawn came, painting the cabin walls rose and gold, Mary found Ethan already awake, coffee brewing on the stove. He'd tidied his bedroll, washed and shaved using the basin by the window. In the morning light, she could see new details of the cabin curtains at the window that looked recently hung, a shelf with a few books, a sketch tacked to the wall that might have been the mountains he'd described. Morning, he said, offering her a cup of coffee. Sleep well? Better than I have in years, Mary admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. They broke their fast with yesterday's leftover cornbread and comfortable conversation. The intimacy of the night hadn't vanished with darkness. If anything, daylight had solidified it into something tangible and true. When it came time to leave, Ethan saddled Sage and helped Mary mount behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and thought how different this was from her usual solitary walks to town. They rode slowly, in no hurry to return to the world's judgment. The storm had washed the landscape clean, leaving everything sparkling with residual moisture. Birds sang from the cottonwoods, and the creek ran high and musical beside the trail. Whatever happens, Mary said against Ethan's shoulder, I want you to know last night was the best of my life. Even if the town runs us out on rails, even if Jake makes good on his threats, even if... Hush, Ethan said gently, covering one of her hands with his. No borrowing trouble. We face what comes as it comes. Together. That's all that matters now, together. As the first buildings of Willow Creek came into view, Mary straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Let them talk. Let them stare. She'd found something worth more than their good opinion. She'd found someone who looked at her and saw treasure instead of trash. And that, she thought as Ethan helped her down in front of her cabin, as he kissed her hand in full view of Mrs. Henderson's shocked face, as he promised to call that evening with flowers and proper intentions that was worth any amount of scandal. The world hadn't changed overnight. She was still plain Mary Foster in a town that valued beauty. He was still a drifting cowboy with more scars than prospects. But together, they were something new, something worth fighting for. Something that looked an awful lot like love. The whispers started before Mary's feet touched her porch steps. Mrs. Henderson's face had been just the beginning by the time Ethan rode away with a promise to return that evening. Curtains were twitching all along the street, and Mary could feel the weight of watching eyes like physical pressure against her spine. She went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, heart hammering. What had she done? In the warm safety of Ethan's cabin, loving him had seemed as natural as breathing. But here, in the harsh light of day and public scrutiny, doubt crept in like smoke under the door. By noon, the story had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire in August. Mary Foster, the town's designated spinster, had spent the night unchaperoned with that drifter Cowboy. The versions grew more scandalous, with each telling by the time Mary ventured out to collect her washing from the line. She'd apparently done everything from seducing him for his pay to selling herself for protection from Jake's gang. "Mary Foster, as I live and breathe." Prudence Wellington's voice cut across the yard like a rusty saw. The banker's wife stood at the fence, her cronies flanking her like carrion birds. "We were just discussing your adventure." Mary forced her hands to stay steady as she unpinned a sheet. "The storm was severe. Mrs. Wellington, Mr. Cole kindly offered shelter." "Oh, I'm sure he offered something." Constance Murphy, no relation to Tom, tittered behind her glove. "Must have been quite the storm to keep you there all night." "Indeed it was," Mary replied evenly, moving to the next sheet. "Lightning struck the old oak by Miller's Pond. Perhaps you heard it?" The women exchanged glances, clearly frustrated by her calm demeanor. They'd expected shame, tears, perhaps defiant anger, not this quiet dignity that refused to acknowledge their implications. "Well," Prudence sniffed, "I suppose we can't all have your fortitude in weathering storms, though one wonders what your dear departed parents would think." That arrow found its mark. Mary's hand stilled on the clothesline, and she had to breathe carefully before responding. "I believe my parents would be grateful that their daughter found safe shelter during dangerous weather. They raised me to accept kindness when offered and to judge people by their actions, not gossip." She gathered her washing and turned to go. But Prudence's parting shot followed her. "Actions indeed. The whole town saw what kind of action took place this morning. Really, Mary, riding through town wrapped around him like a well. I suppose we shouldn't expect better from someone of your situation." Mary made it inside before the tears came. She pressed her face into the clean laundry, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine, and let herself cry for just a moment. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes, and got to work. There were chores to do, and tears wouldn't do them. But as the afternoon wore on, the situation worsened. When Mary arrived at Murphy's for her evening shift, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Men who usually ignored her now stared openly, some with speculation, others with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. Jake Hollister held court at his usual table, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "Told you, boys," he was saying. "Even the ugliest mare will lift her tail if the stallion's desperate enough. Though I gotta wonder what Cole was thinking. Must have been drunker than we thought, taking that to his bed." The laughter that followed was cruel and knowing. Mary kept her head down, focusing on gathering empty glasses, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the tray. "Though I suppose," Jake continued, voice rising to ensure she heard, "a man gets lonely enough. Even a plow horse starts looking good, and our Mary's built like one. Ain't she good for work, if nothing else?" "That's enough. Jake!" Tom Murphy's voice cut through the laughter. "You want a drink here? You keep a civil tongue." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Civil? That's rich. Tom, we're supposed to be civil when she's parading her shame through town, spending nights with drifters, coming back with her hair down like a woman who got caught in a storm." Tom interrupted firmly. "Nothing more, nothing less. Now either order another drink or get out." The saloon fell silent, everyone waiting to see how Jake would respond. He stood slowly, his hand hovering near his gun, but Tom just stared him down with the steadiness of a man who'd seen his share of trouble. "This ain't over," Jake muttered, throwing coins on the table. "Cole thinks he can come into my town, interfere with my business, take what ain't his. He's got another thing coming." After he left, the tension eased slightly, but Mary could still feel the weight of judgment in every glance. She worked mechanically, counting minutes until Ethan would arrive. He'd promised to come, to show the town he was serious about courting her properly. But as the hours passed with no sign of him, doubt crept back in. What if he'd reconsidered? What if the harsh light of day had shown him what everyone else saw, a plain woman not worth the trouble she'd bring? What if? The saloon door swung open, and Ethan walked in. He was dressed in his best, which wasn't much, but the shirt was clean and pressed. His boots shined, his hair slicked back. In his hand, incongruously, was a small bouquet of wildflowers, slightly wilted but carefully arranged. The room went silent. Ethan crossed directly to where Mary stood frozen by the bar. "Miss Foster," he said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've come to ask if I might have the honor of escorting you home after your shift." Mary's throat was too tight for words. She nodded, acutely aware of every eye in the room. "And perhaps," Ethan continued, still in that formal tone that seemed at odds with the man who'd held her in the lamplight, "you might allow me to call on you tomorrow. I thought we might take a ride, if the weather holds." Yes," Mary managed. "That would be, yes." Ethan smiled then, the formal mask dropping to reveal genuine warmth. "Good, I'll wait for you." He handed her the flowers, fingers brushing hers in a touch that felt like a promise. Then, bold as brass, he lifted her work-roughened hand and kissed it, right there in front of everyone. The gesture should have been ridiculous, a courtly affectation in a rough saloon, performed over dirty glasses and spilled beer. Instead, it was like a gauntlet thrown down, a declaration of intent that rang louder than words. Ethan took a seat at the bar, ordered a beer from Tom, and settled in to wait. His presence changed the atmosphere entirely. The crude comments stopped. The leering looks vanished. A few men tried to engage him in conversation, fishing for details about the previous night. But Ethan's responses were polite monosyllables that gave nothing away. Mary tried to focus on her work, but she was intensely aware of him. The solid presence of his back, the way he nursed that single beer, the occasional glance he threw her way that made her stomach flutter. The wildflowers sat in a glass of water behind the bar, cheerful and defiant among the whiskey bottles. It was nearly midnight when her shift ended. Ethan stood as she approached, offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Mary took it, chin high, and together they walked out into the night. They'd barely made it 10 feet before the shadows shifted, and Jake Hollister stepped into their path, flanked by 3 of his cronies. "Well, well," Jake drawled, whiskey heavy on his breath. "The beauty and the beast, though which is which might be up for debate." "Step aside, Jake," Ethan said calmly. "We've no quarrel with you." "No quarrel," Jake laughed, ugly and sharp. "Now you made me look a fool. Cole, interfering with my fun, acting high and mighty, and now you're sniffing around my leftovers." "Watch your mouth," Ethan warned, his voice dropping low. "Or what you'll defend her honor." Jake spat in the dirt. "What honor? Everyone knows what happened last night. Everyone knows what she is now. Just another trail woman, spreading her legs for any drifter who shows interest." Ethan moved so fast Mary barely saw it. One moment he was beside her. The next, Jake was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. The 3 cronies reached for their guns, but Ethan already had his drawn, held steady and sure. "Anyone else want to insult the lady?" he asked conversationally. The men backed away, hands raised. Jake struggled to his feet, wiping blood with his sleeve. "You'll pay for that. Cole, this town's got laws." "Then use them," Ethan suggested. "File a complaint. Tell Sheriff Watson that you got your nose bloodied for calling a decent woman vile names. I'm sure he'll be real sympathetic." Jake's face contorted with rage, but he knew he was beaten. For now. "This ain't over," he snarled. "You think you're something special, both of you, but you'll see. This town don't cotton to uppity women and violent drifters. You'll see." He stalked off, his men trailing behind. Ethan holstered his gun and turned to Mary, who stood trembling with reaction. "You all right?" he asked gently. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He'll make trouble now. Real trouble." "He insulted you. I won't stand for that. Ethan touched her cheek, infinitely gentle. Not now. Not ever. You're going to be my wife. Mary. That means anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. Your wife? The word came out breathless. Ethan, you can't mean... I told you last night. I want to marry you. Court you proper first. Yes, but the end goal doesn't change. He took her hands. Right there in the street where anyone could see. Unless you've changed your mind. I know today was hard. The gossip and judgment, I'll understand if... No, Mary interrupted fiercely. No, I haven't changed my mind. It's just, after today, I thought, I was afraid... That I'd abandon you to face them alone. Ethan shook his head. Mary Foster, when are you going to understand I'm not going anywhere? Not without you. They walked on through the quiet streets, past darkened windows that tomorrow would frame more gossiping faces. But for now, it was just them and the stars and the crickets singing in the grass. At Mary's door, Ethan paused. I meant what I said about courting you proper. Tomorrow, I'll come by at 2. Where's something you can ride in? Where are we going? That's a surprise. He smiled, touched the brim of his hat. Sleep well. Mary, dream of good things. She watched him walk away, then went inside and barred the door. The cabin felt different somehow, not empty, but expectant, as if it too were waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. Mary got ready for bed, moving through her nightly routine automatically. But when she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she stopped. Was that really her? This woman with flushed cheeks and bright eyes, with wildflowers in a jar on her table and the memory of kisses warm on her lips. A knock at the door made her jump. Mary, Bessie Crawford's voice, soft and urgent. Mary, please, let me in. Mary opened the door cautiously. Bessie slipped inside, looking over her shoulder nervously. I had to warn you, Bessie said without preamble. Jake's planning something. I heard him talking to Randall Briggs. Briggs! Mary's blood ran cold. The wealthy landowner had been trying to buy her parents' land for years, offering insulting prices and making veiled threats. Jake owes him money, a lot of money. And Briggs, he's always wanted your land. Mary, that spring on your property feeds into his cattle range. He's been waiting for an excuse to force you out. Bessie wrung her hands. Jake's going to help him. I don't know how, but they were talking about teaching you and Cole a lesson, about making sure you had no choice but to sell. Mary sank into a chair, the happiness of the evening evaporating like morning dew. What can I do? I can't fight them both. You could leave, Bessie suggested gently. Both of you, start fresh somewhere else. This is my home, Mary said stubbornly. My parents are buried on this land. I won't be driven off by bullies and land grabbers. Bessie sighed. I figured you'd say that. Just be careful. Mary, men like Briggs don't play fair, and Jake's meaner than a rattlesnake when he's cornered. After Bessie left, Mary sat in the dark for a long time, thinking. She'd known there would be consequences for accepting Ethan's courtship, for daring to reach for happiness, but she hadn't expected them to come so fast or hit so hard. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound was lonely, but not alone, a call and response across the darkness, like her and Ethan. She thought, two solitary souls finding each other despite the odds. Whatever came tomorrow, whatever schemes Jake and Briggs were hatching, she wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in 5 years, Mary Foster had someone in her corner, someone who saw her worth fighting for. And that, she decided as she finally made her way to bed, was worth any risk. The afternoon sun hung like a brass button in the cloudless sky when the sound of approaching horses made Mary look up from her garden. She'd been trying to save what vegetables she could after yesterday's storm, but her hands stilled on the tomato stakes as she recognized the riders. Randall Briggs led the group, sitting his black stallion like a king surveying his domain. Behind him rode Jake Hollister, nose still swollen from last night's encounter, and 4 men Mary recognized as Briggs's hired hands hard cases who do whatever their boss ordered for the right price. Miss Foster. Briggs touched his hat in mock courtesy. Fine afternoon, isn't it? Mary stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. Mr. Briggs, Jake, what brings you to my property? Your property, Briggs repeated, smiling the way a snake might smile at a mouse. That's what I've come to discuss. You see, I've been patient. 5 years I've waited since your parents passed, giving you time to grieve, to come to terms with reality. But patience has its limits. As does this conversation, Mary replied. I've told you before this land isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Briggs dismounted, his men following suit. Jake stayed on his horse, watching with obvious satisfaction. Question is, what's your price? We can do this friendly-like, or... He let the threat hang. Or what? Ethan's voice came from behind Mary. He stepped out of her cabin, where he'd arrived early for their planned ride. Winchester rifle held casual but ready. You'll threaten a woman on her own land that what passes for business in these parts? Briggs' eyes narrowed. Cole, should have known you'd be sniffing around. Jake here tells me you've developed an interest in Miss Foster. I have, Ethan confirmed, moving to stand beside Mary. A serious interest, the marrying kind of interest, which means her troubles are my troubles. Is that so? Briggs pulled out a sheaf of papers from his jacket. Well then, you'll be interested in these. Seem your lady friend here owes 3 years of back taxes. County's been patient, but that patience is wearing thin. Mary's heart sank. That's not possible. I've paid... Have you? Briggs's smile widened. Funny thing about payments made to Jake here when he was working part-time for the tax office. Seems some of that money never quite made it to the county coffers. Understanding dawned like a punch to the gut. Jake's grin confirmed it. He'd been pocketing her tax payments, setting her up for exactly this moment. You can't prove anything, Mary said, but her voice shook. Don't need to prove it. Briggs replied. County records show you're delinquent. $300 owed, plus penalties. Due in full by week's end. Or the county seizes the property for auction. He pretended to consider. Of course, I might be willing to settle your debt in exchange for the deed. Naturally. That's extortion, Ethan said flatly. That's business. Briggs folded the papers, tucked them away. You've got 5 days. Miss Foster, cash in full. Or sign over the deed. Your choice. There's a third option, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Oh, I pay the debt. Mary keeps her land. You and your pet weasel here find someone else to swindle. Jake's face flushed. You don't have that kind of money. Saddle tramp, $300. You'd need to rob a bank. Or sell something valuable. Ethan replied calmly. Like a horse. Mary turned to him, confused. Sage was a good horse, but no saddle horse was worth $300. Briggs laughed. That nag you ride wouldn't fetch $30 at auction? Not Sage. Ethan's smile was sharp. The horse I've got boarded in Denver, pure Arabian bloodstock, papers and all, worth 5 times what Mary owes. The laughter died. Mary stared at Ethan, as did everyone else. A horse like that was worth a fortune, the kind of mount only the wealthiest ranchers could afford. You're lying, Jake accused. Wire the Double Diamond Ranch in Denver. Ethan suggested. Ask about the bay stallion they're holding for Ethan Cole. Ask what they'd pay to buy him outright instead of boarding him. He paused. Though that might take more time than we have. So here's what's going to happen instead. In one smooth motion, Ethan worked the rifle's lever, not pointing it at anyone, but making his capability clear. You're going to get off this property. Come Sunday, I'll have your money, all of it. And then you're going to leave Mary Foster alone. permanent-like. Or, Briggs asked, though his confidence had visibly shaken. Or I'll kill you. The words were delivered flat, matter of fact. Simple as that. I've killed better men for worse reasons, and I'll sleep just fine after. Something in Ethan's eyes, that 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen too much and survived it all, made the threat real. Even Briggs' hired gun shifted nervously. You threatening me? Cole? Briggs tried to regain control. Stating facts. Ethan corrected. I've drifted a long time. Mr. Briggs, met a lot of men like you, bullies who mistake kindness for weakness, who prey on those they think can't fight back. Usually, I just move on. But not this time. This time, I'm planting my flag, and if you try to hurt what's mine, I'll plant you. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Briggs laughed, but it sounded forced. Big talk from a drifter with a mysterious horse. Fine. Sunday, noon, at the bank. $300 cash, or the lady signs the deed. He remounted, looked down at them. But Cole, if you can't produce that money, I won't just take her land. I'll see you run out of the territory on a rail. That's a promise. They rode off in a cloud of dust, Jake throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. Mary waited until they were out of sight before turning to Ethan, legs suddenly weak. Is it true? She asked. About the horse? Ethan set the rifle aside, took her hands. It's true. Been boarding him since I started drifting. Couldn't bring myself to sell. He was the last colt from my father's prize mare. Kept telling myself I'd go back for him someday, when I found a place to settle. But Ethan, you can't. That horse must mean... You mean more, he said simply. A horse is just a horse, no matter how fine. But you're my future, Mary. Our future. And I won't let them take that away. Mary felt tears threatening. I can't let you sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice if I'm getting something better in return. He cupped her face gently. Let me do this. Let me fight for you, for us, please. She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and fear and love into the contact. When they parted, both were breathless. We should go to Sheriff Watson, Mary said. Tell him about Jake stealing the tax money. With what proof Jake was smart, probably destroyed any records. Ethan shook his head. No, we do this Briggs's way. I'll leave for Denver tomorrow. Be back by Saturday with the money. I'm coming with you, Mary said immediately. Mary, no. It's 2 days hard riding each way. And if something happens, I want to be with you. She interrupted. Besides, you think Briggs and Jake will just wait patiently the moment you're gone. They'll be back here, trying to force me to sign, or worse. Ethan considered this. Jaw tight. She was right, and they both knew it. Leaving her alone for 4 days was asking for trouble. All right, he conceded. We leave at dawn. Packlight will need to ride fast. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Mary gathered what she'd need for the journey while Ethan checked weapons, mapped their route, prepared Sage and Mary's gentle mare, Buttercup, for hard travel. As the sun set, he insisted on staying the night. For protection, he said firmly when Mary protested the propriety. I'll bed down in the barn, but I won't leave you alone, not with them circling like vultures. That night, Mary lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of her home wind in the eaves. Coyotes in the distance, the creak of old wood settling. But underneath ran a new sound footsteps as Ethan patrolled, keeping watch. The knowledge that someone cared enough to guard her sleep brought tears to her eyes. Just before dawn, she rose and dressed in her father's old riding clothes, pants, and a shirt that would scandalize the town but make the long ride possible. She found Ethan already saddling the horses, moving with quiet efficiency in the pre-dawn darkness. Ready? He asked, helping her secure her saddlebags. Ready, she confirmed, though her heart hammered with more than the prospect of hard travel. This felt like a crossing point leave now. And everything would change, win or lose. There'd be no going back to her quiet, solitary life. They mounted up and rode out as the eastern sky began to lighten, leaving behind the only home Mary had ever known. She looked back once, at the small cabin that held all her memories, good and bad. Then she faced forward, toward the unknown horizon and the man who'd chosen to fight for her. The first day's ride was grueling. Ethan set a pace just short of punishing, following trails Mary hadn't known existed. They stopped only to water the horses and eat cold biscuits, pushing through the heat of midday and into evening. As darkness fell, they made camp in a sheltered grove. Ethan tended the horses while Mary gathered wood for a small fire. The domesticity of it working together, anticipating each other's needs, made her heart ache with longing for a future where this could be everyday reality. "Tell me about the horse," Mary said as they ate beans and dried beef by firelight. "The one you're selling." Ethan smiled sadly. "Wildfire, that's his name. Fastest, smartest horse I've ever known. My father bred him special, talking about creating a whole line of horses that could run like the wind and work cattle like they were born to it." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Had big dreams. My father, Wildfire, was going to be the start of something grand. And now he's just a valuable asset gathering dust in a Denver stable." Ethan looked at her across the flames. "My father would understand. He always said the best horses were the ones that carried you home. Well, Wildfire's going to carry us both home, just not the way anyone expected." They reached Denver late on the second day, exhausted and dust-covered. The city sprawled before them, bigger and louder than anything Mary had experienced. She stayed close to Ethan as he navigated the busy streets, finally stopping at an impressive livery stable on the outskirts. Cole, the stable master, a grizzled man named Humphrey, greeted Ethan with obvious pleasure. "Been wondering when you'd come for that stallion. He's been pining, I swear it." They followed Humphrey through the stable to a large box stall. The horse inside took Mary's breath away, deep bay coat that shone like polished wood. Elegant head. Intelligent eyes that fixed immediately on Ethan. Wildfire nickered, low and pleased, pressing his nose into Ethan's chest. "Hello, boy," Ethan murmured, running his hands along the stallion's neck. "Miss me?" Watching them together, Mary understood exactly what this sacrifice meant. This wasn't just a valuable horse. This was Ethan's last link to his past, his family, his dreams before tragedy rewrote his life. "I can't let you do this," she said quietly. "Already decided?" Ethan replied, but his voice was rough. "Humphrey, I need to sell him. Cash deal, tonight if possible." Humphrey's eyes widened. "Sell Wildfire, but I need $300 minimum, more if possible." "300? Humphrey whistled. "Ethan, I could get you 500 easy, maybe 6. Horse like this, there's a buyer from California been asking about Arabian bloodstock." "But are you sure?" "I'm sure." Ethan gave Wildfire one last pat, then stepped back. "Set it up. We need the money by morning." The deal was struck that night in Humphrey's office. The buyer, a wealthy rancher named Morrison, paid $550 cash for Wildfire, barely able to hide his glee at the bargain. Mary watched Ethan count the bills with steady hands, but she saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, the careful blankness in his eyes. They took a room at a respectable boarding house, 2 rooms, actually for propriety's sake. But Mary heard Ethan pacing in the night, knew he was mourning the loss of his last tangible connection to his old life. Come morning, they began the ride back. The saddlebags were heavy with cash, but Ethan seemed heavier with grief. They pushed hard again, both aware that time was their enemy now. Briggs might move against the property early, or set up an ambush on the trail. Every shadow could hide a threat. But they made it back to Willow Creek by Saturday evening, exhausted but triumphant. Word of their return spread quickly, and by the time they reached Mary's cabin, Half the town seemed to be watching from porches and windows. "I'll stay again tonight," Ethan said as they unsaddled the weary horses. "Tomorrow, we finish this." Mary nodded. Too tired to argue about propriety? They'd ridden hundreds of miles together, faced danger and loss. The opinions of gossip seemed insignificant now. That night, she broke her own rules and brought him supper in the barn. They ate together in the hay-scented darkness, not talking about tomorrow or what came after, just being together, drawing strength from each other's presence. "Whatever happens," Mary said as she prepared to return to the house, "I want you to know these past days, riding with you, working beside you, it's shown me what life could be, what a real partnership could feel like. This isn't ending tomorrow," Ethan said firmly. "No matter what Briggs tries to pull, no matter what the town says, we're just getting started. Mary Foster, you and me." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, tasting promise on his lips. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, possibly violence. But tonight, they had each other and the knowledge that some things were worth any sacrifice. The money sat in Ethan's saddlebags, representing so much more than numbers on paper. It was proof of commitment, evidence of love, a down payment on a future neither had dared imagine alone. Tomorrow, they would face Randall Briggs and Jake Hollister. Tomorrow, they would fight for Mary's land and their right to build a life together. But tonight, with stars wheeling overhead and crickets singing in the grass, they had already won the only battle that truly mattered. They had chosen each other, against all odds and expectations. And that choice, Mary thought as she finally drifted toward sleep, was worth more than all the Arabian horses in the world. Sunday dawned blood red, the sky streaked with crimson clouds that looked like warning flags. Mary stood at her window, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in shades of fire and shadow. Behind her, she could hear Ethan checking his weapons, the metallic click of bullets sliding into chambers, the whisper of leather as he adjusted his gun belt. "You don't have to come," he said for the third time that morning. "I can handle this." "We've been through this," Mary replied, turning from the window. She dressed carefully, her best dress, the dark blue one that made her feel almost presentable, but with her father's pistol tucked into her reticule. "We face them together." Ethan crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. "If shooting starts, I'll take cover," she promised. "But I won't hide here while you fight my battles." He kissed her forehead, a blessing and a worry combined. "Our battles," he corrected. "From now on, everything's ours." They rode into town side by side, the weight of the money in Ethan's saddlebags seeming to grow heavier with each step. The streets were unusually full for a Sunday morning. Word had spread about the confrontation, and folks had gathered like spectators at a prize fight. The bank sat on Main Street like a squat brick toad, its windows reflecting the morning sun. Randall Briggs waited on the boardwalk, dressed in his Sunday finest. Flanked by Jake and 6 hired guns, the message was clear this would go his way, or it would go badly. "Mr. Cole, Miss Foster," Briggs touched his hat mockingly. "Prompt as promised. I do admire punctuality." "We have your money," Ethan said without preamble, dismounting and helping Mary down. "All $300, plus penalties." "Do you now?" Briggs's smile was razor thin. "Well then, shall we step inside and conduct our business properly?" The bank was closed on Sundays, but Briggs had a key. Of course he did, Mary thought bitterly. The man had his fingers in everything that mattered in this town. They filed inside, the hired guns positioning themselves strategically around the small lobby. Banker Josiah Winthrop sat behind his desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. Sheriff Watson stood in the corner, badge glinting, expression unreadable. The presence of the lawman should have been reassuring, but Mary knew Watson owed his position to Briggs's influence. "Now then," Briggs said, settling into a chair like a king on his throne. "The money, if you please." Ethan set the saddlebags on the desk, opened them to reveal neat stacks of bills. Winthrop's eyes widened at the sight. Count it, Ethan instructed. Every dollar. The banker's fingers flew over the bills, tallying quickly. $350, he announced. More than sufficient to cover the debt and penalties. Well, well. Briggs leaned back, steepling his fingers. I'm impressed. Cole, didn't think a saddle tramp could scrape together that kind of money honestly. Are you implying something? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Not at all, though one does wonder. Briggs gestured lazily. Sheriff, might be wise to check if any banks between here and Denver have reported robberies recently. The money's clean, Ethan stated flatly. Sold a horse. Humphrey's livery in Denver can verify it. Of course, of course. Briggs waved dismissively. Still? Due diligence and all. Can't be too careful. Sheriff, Watson shifted uncomfortably. I suppose I could wire Denver. Ask some questions. Might take a day or two to get answers. During which time the deadline passes, Mary said, understanding dawning. And you seize my property anyway. The law's the law, Briggs said with false regret. Can't accept payment that might be stolen goods. I'm sure you understand. I understand plenty, Mary snapped. I understand you're a thief and a liar who... The door burst open, interrupting her tirade. Tom Murphy strode in, followed by Bessie Crawford and, surprisingly, Prudence Wellington and several other townswomen. Sorry we're late, Murphy said cheerfully. Took a while to gather everyone. What is this? Briggs demanded, half rising from his chair. This, Prudence announced with crisp authority, is a delegation of concerned citizens. She pulled out a leather folder, extracted several documents. Mr. Winthrop, you'll want to see these. The banker accepted the papers with trembling hands, read quickly, his face paling. These are receipts, tax payment receipts. Indeed they are. Prudence confirmed. It seems several of us have been comparing notes, payments we made to Jake Hollister during his brief tenure at the tax office that somehow never made it to the county coffers, payments we can prove we made. Thanks to these receipts, Jake was careless enough to sign. Jake's face had gone white. Those are forgeries I never... Your signature's quite distinctive, Bessie interrupted. That fancy flourish you do hard to fake. She smiled sweetly. Especially when we have dozens of examples to compare. I've already wired the county seat, Murphy added. The real tax assessor is very interested in Jake's creative bookkeeping. Very interested indeed. The room erupted. Jake lunged for the door, but Ethan was faster, clotheslining him with an extended arm. Jake hit the floor hard, gasping. Two of Briggs' hired guns reached for their weapons, but found themselves staring down the barrels of Murphy's shotgun and, more surprisingly, Prudence Wellington's pearl-handled Derringer. Gentlemen, Prudence said coolly, I suggest you reconsider. We may be civilized folk, but we know how to handle varmints when necessary. Sheriff, Murphy said conversationally, his shotgun never wavering. Seems to me you've got a choice. Arrest Jake Hollister for embezzlement and theft, or explain to the county why you're protecting a criminal. Your call. Watson looked between Briggs and the armed townspeople, calculating rapidly. Self-preservation won. Jake Hollister, you're under arrest for theft and embezzlement. He hauled Jake to his feet, slapping on manacles. You have the right to shut your mouth before you dig yourself deeper. This is ridiculous, Briggs exploded. You can't just... Actually, we can. Prudence interrupted. You see, Mr. Briggs, some of us have gotten tired of your methods. Buying up land through trickery, using intimidation and corrupt officials. It stops now. Furthermore, Winthrop spoke up, voice gaining strength. I'll be happy to accept, Mr. Cole's payment immediately. The debt is cleared. Miss Foster's property remains hers, and any further attempts to seize it will be met with resistance. Briggs' face contorted with rage. You think you've won? This isn't over. You'll do nothing, Ethan said, stepping forward. Because if you come near Mary again, if you so much as look at her property, I'll kill you. And unlike your hired thugs, I don't miss. That's a threat, Sheriff. You heard? I heard a man protecting his future wife, Watson said blandly. Perfectly understandable. Now, Mr. Briggs, I suggest you and your men leave peacefully. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke before a fire. Briggs' men looked to him for orders, hands hovering near their guns, but they were outnumbered now, facing not just Ethan but a bank full of armed, angry citizens. This isn't over, Briggs repeated, but the words lacked conviction. He stood, straightened his coat with jerky movements. You've made a powerful enemy today, all of you. Get in line, Murphy suggested. Behind all the other folks you've cheated and bullied over the years. Briggs stalked out, his hired guns trailing. Through the window, they watched him mount his black stallion and ride off, dust devils swirling in his wake like miniature tornadoes. Well, Prudence said, tucking her derringer back into her reticule. That was invigorating. Mary, Mr. Cole, I believe I owe you both an apology. Mary blinked, certain she'd misheard. Mrs. Wellington. I've been unkind, the older woman admitted, judgmental. Part of it was genuine disapproval. I'll admit I was raised with certain expectations of propriety, but part was envy. Envy? Mary couldn't hide her shock. You've lived life on your own terms, difficult as that's been. You've maintained your independence, your integrity, despite everything. Prudence's smile was rueful. Those of us who followed all the rules, made all the right choices, sometimes we wonder what we missed. You organized this, Ethan said, understanding dawning. The receipts, the townspeople. Bessie came to me last night, Prudence explained, told me what was planned, and I realized I had a choice: maintain my comfortable position in Briggs's pocket, or do what was right. She straightened her shoulders. My late husband would have been appalled at my cowardice these past years. Today seemed a good day to make amends. One by one, the townspeople came forward. Some offered apologies. Others just nods of acknowledgement. The wall of isolation that had surrounded Mary for so long began to crumble, brick by social brick. Winthrop finished the paperwork, stamping it with official seals. Your property is clear. Miss Foster, no debts, no liens. It's yours. Free and clear. Mary accepted the documents with shaking hands. After all the fear and struggle, it seemed almost anticlimactic, just paper and ink confirming what she'd always known. This was her land, her home, her life to build as she chose. There's one more thing, Ethan said, and something in his voice made everyone turn. He dropped to one knee right there in the bank, pulling out a small velvet box. Mary Ellen Foster, I sold my horse to save your land, but I'd sell my soul to see you smile. Will you marry me? The bank went silent. Even Jake, being hauled toward the door by Sheriff Watson, stopped struggling to watch. Mary looked down at Ethan, this man who'd wandered into her life and changed everything, who'd seen her truly and found her worthy of sacrifice. The ring in the box was simple, a thin gold band with a small stone that caught the light like captured starfire. Where did you? Denver, he admitted. Seemed foolish to make the trip without taking care of all our business. Yes, Mary said, not caring about the tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, yes. The bank erupted in cheers as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her properly. Even Watson smiled before remembering he had a prisoner to escort. This calls for a celebration, Murphy announced. Drinks at my place, on the house. The crowd began filing out, chattering excitedly. Prudence paused beside Mary, pressed something into her hand, a delicate lace handkerchief. For the wedding, she said softly. Something old. It was my mother's. Mrs. Wellington, I don't know what to say. Say you'll invite me. I do love a good wedding. Prudence squeezed her hand. And Mary, welcome to the community. Properly, this time. As the bank emptied, Ethan and Mary stood together in a shaft of sunlight, her hand in his, the ring catching fire with each movement. We did it, Mary breathed. We actually did it. We did, Ethan agreed. Though I should warn you, Briggs won't give up easily. Men like him never do. Let him come, Mary said with newfound confidence. I've got my land, my man, and apparently more friends than I knew. What else could I need? A wedding date, Ethan suggested, pulling her close. Because I'm not willing to wait long to make you Mrs. Cole. Next month, Mary decided. After harvest, we'll have the ceremony at the ranch, under the cottonwoods by the creek, where it all began. Ethan murmured, kissing her again. They left the bank hand in hand, walking down Main Street like they owned it. In a way, Mary supposed they did not through money or force, but through the simple act of refusing to be driven away. The confrontation was over, but their story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead. Briggs would scheme. People would gossip. Building a life together would require work and compromise and daily choice. But standing in the morning sun, with Ethan's hand warm in hers, Mary felt ready for all of it. She'd spent years believing she was too ugly to be loved, too plain to be chosen, too rough to be cherished. But one wandering cowboy had seen past all of that to the woman underneath, strong and vulnerable, practical and passionate, worthy of sacrifice and capable of joy. The ring on her finger wasn't just a promise of marriage. It was proof that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love could bloom in the harshest ground. All it needed was someone brave enough to tend it. Home, Ethan asked, helping her mount Buttercup. Home, Mary agreed, the word tasting sweeter than honey on her tongue. They rode out of town together, toward the little cabin that would soon shelter two hearts instead of one. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning's blood-red clouds. Ahead, the future stretched bright and full of promise, a trail they would ride together. And if anyone had bothered to look, they would have seen Mary Foster's face transformed not by powder or paint or artificial beauty, but by the simple radiance of a woman who'd finally learned her own worth. She wasn't too ugly to be loved. She never had been. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and golden, with the kind of pristine autumn sky that made the Wyoming territory look like God's own cathedral. Mary stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Bessie Crawford and Prudence Wellington fussed around her, adjusting the simple white dress they'd helped her sew. It wasn't fancy. Mary had insisted on something practical she could wear again, but with her mother's pearl buttons down the front and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was the finest thing she'd ever worn. Hold still, Prudence commanded, pinning another wildflower into Mary's hair, which Bessie had coaxed into soft waves. There, perfect. I don't look like myself, Mary said wonderingly. Nonsense, Prudence replied briskly. You look exactly like yourself, a woman in love on her wedding day. The rest of us have simply been too blind to see it before. Through the window, Mary could see guests gathering by the creek. Tom Murphy had insisted on providing refreshments, setting up tables under the cottonwoods where she and Ethan had first truly seen each other. The whole town had turned out. Even those who'd whispered behind her back for years seemed eager to witness the transformation of their designated old maid into a bride. It's time, Bessie said gently, squeezing Mary's hand. The walk to the creek had never seemed shorter or longer. Mary's heart hammered as she emerged from the cabin, but then she saw Ethan waiting under the largest cottonwood, and everything else faded away. He wore a new black suit that Tom had insisted on buying him, his hair neatly trimmed, boots shined to mirror brightness. But it was his expression that made Mary's breath catch wonder and joy and fierce possession all mixed together as he watched her approach. Sheriff Watson, who had offered to officiate, stood ready with an open Bible. The crowd fell silent as Mary took her place beside Ethan, their hands finding each other instinctively. "Dearly beloved," Watson began, his voice carrying across the water, "we are gathered here to witness something remarkable. Not just a wedding, but a triumph. These two people have chosen each other against all odds, against all expectations, and in doing so, they've shown us all what courage looks like." Mary barely heard the traditional words that followed. She was lost in Ethan's eyes, in the warm strength of his hands holding hers, in the miracle of standing here when just months ago she'd been resigned to eternal solitude. "The vows," Watson prompted gently. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mary Ellen Foster, I came to this town as a drifter, running from grief and looking for nothing more than a few days' wages. Instead, I found you. I found home. You've taught me that strength isn't about facing danger alone. It's about having someone worth fighting beside. I promise to see you, truly see you, every day of our lives. I promise to choose you, again and again, in good times and bad, in plenty and in want. I promise to build a life with you that would make both our parents proud. You saved me. Mary, let me spend the rest of my life returning the favor." Mary was crying openly now, not caring who saw, when she found her voice. It was stronger than she'd expected. "Ethan Cole, you rode into my life like an answer to prayers I'd stopped praying. You saw past everything this town said about me, everything I believed about myself, and found someone worth loving. You sacrificed your most precious possession for my happiness and taught me that I was worth that sacrifice. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner in work and rest, in joy and sorrow. I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown me. You chose me when no one else would. I choose you now and forever." "The rings," Watson said, his own voice suspiciously rough. Young Timothy Henderson, scrubbed and solemn in his role as ring-bearer, stepped forward with the simple gold bands. Ethan had used part of the money from Wildfire's sale to buy them in Denver, matching circles that caught the light like captured promises. They exchanged the rings with trembling hands, the metal warm and solid, real in a way that still seemed impossible. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Watson declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender and thorough, earning cheers from the crowd. When they parted, both were grinning like children on Christmas morning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Watson announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Cole." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Willow Creek had seen. Tom's whiskey flowed freely, but it was the joy that truly intoxicated. Mary found herself passed from one congratulatory embrace to another. Women who'd shunned her now pressing recipes and household advice into her hands. Even more surprising was the wedding gift from Prudence Wellington and several other prominent families, a deed to 20 acres adjoining Mary's property, purchased from a homesteader who'd given up on the harsh land. "For your cattle," Prudence explained. "A proper ranch needs room to grow." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan pulled Mary away from the crowd. They walked along the creek, finding the flat stone where he'd first washed his clothes beside her. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "Only one," Mary admitted. "I wish my parents could have seen this, could have known that their daughter found someone who sees her as beautiful." "They know," Ethan said softly. "How could they not love like ours has to echo somewhere?" They stood together as twilight gathered, watching their guests dance and laugh under lanterns Tom had strung between the trees. Jake Hollister was serving time in the territorial prison. Randall Briggs had left for California, his empire crumbling after the town turned against him. The threats that had loomed so large had dissolved like morning mist, leaving only possibility in their wake. "We should build a real house," Ethan said suddenly. "Not just fix up the cabin, but build something new, something big enough for a family." Mary's heart skipped. "A family?" "If you want, when you're ready." He kissed her temple. "I'm in no rush. Just having you is miracle enough." "I want that," Mary said fiercely. "All of it. The house, the ranch, the children, the life we talked about in the dark." "Then we'll have it. Day by day, season by season. We'll build it all." As if summoned by their dreams, Tom Murphy approached with a telegram. "This came for you, Ethan, from Denver." Ethan read it, his expression cycling through surprise, sadness, and finally, a kind of peace. "Morrison, the man who bought Wildfire, says the stallion won't work. Pining, he says. Wants to know if I'll buy him back for half what he paid." "Oh, Ethan," Mary gripped his arm. "Your horse." "Our horse," Ethan corrected. "What do you think, Mrs. Cole? Should we bring Wildfire home?" "Yes," Mary said instantly. "He belongs here, with us." Ethan smiled, that slow, transformative expression that still made her stomach flutter. "I'll wire Morrison tomorrow. Tell him to send Wildfire home." Home. The word settled between them like a blessing. No longer just a place, but a feeling they created together. The party lasted until the moon rose full and bright, silvering the creek and turning the cottonwood leaves to coins. Finally, the guests began to drift away, calling out final congratulations and ribald jokes that made Mary blush and Ethan grin. Tom was among the last to leave, pressing a wrapped package into Mary's hands. "Wedding gift," he said gruffly. "Figured you could use it." Inside was a set of china dishes, delicate blue flowers painted on white porcelain. "Tom, this is too much." "It was my wife's," he interrupted. "Been sitting in storage since she passed. Martha would have wanted them used, wanted them to grace a happy home. You two remind me of us. When we were young." "Don't waste time. You hear love hard. Fight fair, and don't waste a single day." After he left, Mary and Ethan stood alone under the stars. The creek gurgled its eternal song, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightingale began to sing. "Well, Mrs. Cole," Ethan said, sweeping her into his arms. "Shall I carry you over the threshold?" Mary laughed, the sound bright as the stars overhead. "I can walk, you know." "I know, but I've waited a long time to do this proper." He lifted her easily, her wedding dress fluttering in the night breeze. "Besides, I need the practice. Plan on doing this every anniversary for the next 50 years. "Only 50, Mary teased as he carried her toward the cabin that would shelter them until they could build their dreams board by board. "You're right. Better make it 70, 80, if we're lucky." He set her down gently inside the doorway, and they stood together in the familiar space made new by their changed circumstances. Mary's grandmother's quilt still covered the bed. Her mother's dishes sat on the shelves. But now Ethan's belongings mingled with hers, his shaving kit by the basin, his spare boots by the door, his rifle mounted above the fireplace. "I love you, Mary Cole," Ethan said softly. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for seeing me," Mary replied. "For teaching me I was worth seeing." They came together in the lamplight. Two souls no longer solitary, no longer defined by loss or loneliness. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and wild, full of challenges and chances. But inside their small shelter, love had built walls stronger than any storm. As Mary fell asleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first night when Ethan had defended her in Murphy's saloon to this moment of perfect belonging. Every step had been a choice to hope when despair was easier, a choice to trust when betrayal was familiar, a choice to love when the world insisted she wasn't worthy of it. The morning would bring work fences to mend, cattle to tend, a life to build from scratch and stubbornness. There would be hard times ahead, no doubt, winter storms and summer droughts, sick livestock and failed crops, the challenge of two independent spirits learning to move as one. But there would also be mornings waking wrapped in each other's warmth, evenings on the porch they'd build, watching sunsets paint the sky, children, God willing, to fill their expanded home with laughter, years of washing clothes side by side at the creek where it all began, a lifetime of being chosen, again and again, by someone who saw past surface to soul. My beautiful wife, Ethan murmured in his sleep, pulling her closer. Beautiful? Mary smiled in the darkness, finally believing it might be true. Not because her features had changed or her figure had improved, but because love had transformed her from the inside out. She was beautiful because she was loved, because she was seen, because she was chosen. And that, Mary thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest beauty of all. Years later, when their daughters would ask how they met, Mary would tell them about the storm that brought them together. When their sons wondered about true courage, Ethan would describe a woman who faced each day's contempt with quiet dignity. And when the grandchildren begged for love stories, they would both speak of washing clothes by a creek, of wildflowers in a saloon, of choosing each other when the whole world said they were wrong. But that was all still to come. For now, there was only this two hearts beating as one in a small cabin on the edge of forever. Proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest truth: everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. Even the virgin maid who thought she was too ugly. Especially her. In a small cabin by a creek in Wyoming territory, love had finally found its way home. And in that home, two people who'd thought themselves unworthy of happiness discovered that they'd been wrong all along. They'd always been beautiful. They just needed someone to show them how to see it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about Mary and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, courage, and redemption on the frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world and helps these tales reach hearts that need to hear them. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.